So our guest is Dr. Jane Greenberg. Jane is the Alice Kroger Professor at the Drexel University College of Information.
College of Computing and
Information. Informatics. Wow.
Wait.
They keep changing the name.
College of Computing and Informatics, yes. There.
She's a survivor of having taken classes with me back when I was young and had black hair. And now she's a full professor and prolific author and prolific grants person, and she's internationally regarded as expert in metadata applications. And for the last 2 years, this is her final visit with us, she has been our research group's senior associate researcher. So she's been visiting us and working with our doctoral students and working with us on code, which is coming along, cross fingers, not wood. So my pleasure to present Jane Greenberg.
So I am going to talk about metadata capital, and you've been hearing me talk about it. And it was a small project, one that I hope will live on and through other projects. And where we are, many more questions than answers with this work. And so I don't know if you had a chance to read the abstract associated with it, but the last line says, I hope we can have a dialogue. And so I really do hope we can have a dialogue. I do want to acknowledge that the work that I'm presenting has really been part of a team effort. We've been working with people from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is a major research center in Raleigh, North Carolina, Research Triangle Park. It's one of the institutes of health, and also earlier people working on self-generated health information from RTI. All right, so what am I going to do? I do want to start with a thank you for a few minutes, and then I have some eye candy to hopefully get you thinking so we can have a discussion later on. Then I'm going to move into motivation for the metadata capital research project. Some of it might be things you've seen me talk about before, so I'm not going to belabor it, but let you know progress to date, and then I have concluding remarks, a few comments, and then hopefully a discussion, and I will pay attention to time. I do sometimes talk a bit quick and get going, so feel free to say slow down or something, or interrupt me. So, Richard, I told you I didn't want you to see the slides, but I put it up here, and it's really special. Just having a group of faculty and students jumping in on these topics and being able to get together and talk about KOrg. I just really want to thank you for the intellectual engagement, and I don't know if you realize it, not many schools have such a cluster. I have recently gone to Drexel. I love UNC, I love Drexel, and I do have a few colleagues, but it's to have a cluster of, especially your doctoral students going through and having other students sort of reading the same literature all the time and talking about it, and a host of faculty. So thanks to the SOS for supporting it, and especially to the KOrg group. And so yeah, I told you my head hurts when I leave, and I change that to a little smile there, so an annotation, but it hurts in a good way when I come out here. And so I have to find a way to keep coming somehow. I also, I don't know, Richard, maybe you should close your eyes so I don't embarrass you, but it's funny. I was, yes, Richard said I survived his class, but I don't look at it that way. When I think back to Columbia, I really look at it as a really special experience, and especially for you KOrg folks that are taking classes here and have been able to be in the seminar or taking classes with other KOrg faculty. Michael Nelson is a pal of mine, but also a colleague, and I was looking at his webpage recently because I wanted to look at some stuff he's doing with metadata, and I thought, wow, he has this thing called academic lineage, and am I saying this correctly? Yes. And then I went and looked, and he had this whole list. I was thinking, Richard, you have a lineage, and where do you can go back, and you're all here. So maybe a project in the future to work on. So, you know, he traces his back to 1802. So, pretty cool. All right, so now I'm moving on to some eye candy. Right, I think I did this once before with you guys, but please think about this for a second. Write something down. An activity, jot it down. You have in your head, what is capital to you? So, anybody doing anything? You got your answer? How do you describe value? Think about this for a second. I can hear a keyboard going. Probably some of you in email, there you go. You know, is this capital a form of capital? Simple eye candy? Is that value? Perhaps. You know, what about antiques or something, you know, some kind of cherished family heirloom that's been passed on? How do we think about it? Obviously, could have some kind of personal value. Is it worth money? Sometimes perhaps, sometimes not. Think about the relationship between capital and value. And then here, friendships. Or friendships are valuable. Social networks are valuable. What's the relationship there between capital and value? There's a concept that people talk about, which is social capital, right? It's in the KOrg. Knowledge is power. So knowledge is power. Knowledge is valuable. When we think about knowledge is value, intellectual value of something. So I've said this in different ways when I've come out, but I thought maybe a little eye candy just to remind you of where I'm coming from. And so now to move on to the work, and I really feel like we have some small studies that we've done to move the idea forward, but they're nowhere near where I would dream of us getting, and we have many more unanswered questions and so forth. And when I look at what we've done, and I'm going to share a little bit more, I think we've moved forward on the discussion of a topic. And so what were the motivations for this idea of metadata capital? Well, the first one was Dublin Core 2010. The conference call came out, and the theme was making metadata work harder. And I wanted to go to the Netherlands for the conference. And I kept thinking about this project I've been involved in for, since 2006, the Dryad Data Repository Project. And I've spoken about it here. It's a repository where scientists put data underlying peer-reviewed publications. It started out in evolutionary biology. It's now, actually they now call it a general purpose repository, but it is pretty much in the applied and basic science domain. And so data goes into this repository and journal articles are published. And so they're linked through identifiers. But the data is in there and it's downloaded, and now since we've been at it for a while, we actually are tracking cases of data reuse. And what happens with the data reuse is the metadata goes along with the data reuse. So if the metadata is good and it costs money to create in the first place, I started thinking about, could we say that value increases over time? The initial investment in creating that metadata to describe the scientific data, and it travels each time that data is reused. And that was what I was thinking. I never got the paper done for 2010, but I did the paper with my team a few years later when the Dublin Core was in Lisbon. What date was that? 2013. So we actually wrote the paper finally, and it says metadata capital, and we looked at the data reuse and specifically the metadata reuse over time. And but to get actual figures on the cost of how much it costs to create metadata, is really hard. In that project, we comfortably came up with, it was about $40 to create the initial metadata record, which is actually pretty low cost, but that was because we were automatically extracting metadata from the publications to describe the data underlying it. You could think about research that you do. If you do research and you have data underneath it, well, who's the author of that data? You know, the spreadsheet you created, right? Probably you, and you're gonna end up being the author of the paper. So that kind of would work out. There wasn't always a one-to-one correspondence, but that's how that system works. And I'm happy to talk more about it later. I'm not actually reporting on that initial study, but the whole double core and this idea of making metadata work harder was one of the really chief motivators for me thinking about this topic and bringing people together. The other, actually I don't have Malcup's name written down here, but when I was at Columbia and I took a seminar on bibliographic control, we had to read the Malcup, and I'm drawing blank on the actual title, Economics of Information. It's a classic work. And so that always stuck in the back of my head, and so also thinking about economics, you know, Adam Smith and Weber and the ideas underlying capital, just, you know, it's kind of a household term in some ways, right, when we talk about capital. And so that was also a motivator and stuck with me, and I did a little work looking for formulas, and there is something called the capital sigma notation, and it just says with incremental use the value can increase, and so that was part of the motivation in looking at metadata as a product, an asset. And so now I have a third motivation. I don't think I've shared this with you yet, and so this topic has some appeal to industry now, and people are thinking about metadata in a different light. It's kind of had a, I want to say, a new awakening, in that, you know, I do thank Snowden for getting metadata kind of back on the map, or on the map in a way that other people pay attention to it, and so a motivator for continuing this work in some way. You know, metadata is looked at in some contexts now as a first-class object where it wasn't paid attention to before, particularly because of the whole NSA affair. And so I do have this quote that I give sometimes, you know, I mean, it's cliche, right? Your data is only as good as your metadata. Think about it, it's not necessarily true. You could have really bad metadata and good data, or good metadata and bad data, but it's still kind of a hook for thinking about it. And you know, in an ideal world, you would have good metadata and describing your research data or whatever data you have. And you know, we can get all like crazy, right? Because metadata is data too. So those are our motivators, my motivators, and I already mentioned the Dryad project, and this is just the operation where the scientists put in their peer-reviewed things, articles, and they get reviewed, and then they have to put their data in, and there's curation, and a project that we do work with is we assign controlled vocabulary concepts with Hive. So I am curious how many people here have this is the first time hearing me talk about metadata and a capital project. So most of you have heard before, and I show you this little diagram. So anyhow, basically that whole idea of reuse and the $40 with the initial Dryad, and so could we say that it increased each time because all the metadata associated with the data is reused, and then at some point maybe not all the metadata is reused, so the value is a little bit less. So there were two projects that we worked on over the last year, supported by the Renaissance Computing Institute, National Consortium for Data Science. That's how we got moving on this project. And one was with Fitbit data, or you know, self-generated health information, and looking at that data and thinking about the reuse of that data that you gather and the metadata associated with it, and can it be used in some way for predictive analysis, getting into data science questions, and where can we kind of raise the flag for, in that context, you really have to have the metadata. I mean, government is very interested in this kind of data, health insurance agencies, you bet yourself, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they wanna get a hold of that. So we had a team, and Tom Caruso is from RTI International. That's a research organization in the Research Triangle Park, and has done probably the most work in this area. Just a definition of self-generated health information here, the data associated with health apps, and the kinds of stuff. I mean, how many people have one of these systems? Anybody wearing one? One, two? I had one, but I wasn't really good about it. Gave it to one of my kids. Heart rate, steps, calories, and so forth are the kinds of information. So one of the arguments we make when we have talked to people about it is, so all of that sounds good, but you could have that chart without any of the metadata associated with it, it wouldn't have any value. I think that's pretty common sense. We did a lot of work looking at the kinds of data that is collected on these applications, and then the metadata labels, trying to find similarities, and we found the most popular kinds of metadata properties or labels, and things under development. As part of our work, we were able to find that there is work coming out of the OECD where they actually have been able to do some valuation of actual nuggets of data. We didn't get anywhere near this in our project, but we would love to have. So, they have high-powered economists working at the OECD in Paris. We did have an economics person on our team. So, little did you know, right, your birthday is worth $2 and your address is worth 50 cents. But people are at it and thinking, and I don't have the inside scoop of what goes on in Blue Cross Blue Shield behind the scenes, but my suspicions are they're looking at this and they're trying to get their heads around it. And so can we do it for the metadata? What did we do? We looked through we did a lot of use cases, working through and mapping and talking in team meetings, and thinking about the kind of data that you put on it, that you would gather, basically heart rate and breathing rate and number of steps, and could we integrate that with environmental data to help predict asthma? That's how we were able to get, perhaps asthma outbreaks, that's how we were able to get our health people together with us on the team. But we had a really difficult time, and are still struggling, is the difference between metadata, labels associated with the data. They just didn't see it. And I can't tell you, I'm just giving you the reality of how many team meetings we had. And we were able to take some real data and do a simulation and 2,000 cases and put fake environmental conditions on people and give some people bad weather conditions and some people good weather conditions, and be able to predict, if you live in, I'll say Philadelphia, and you're in there all summer and you are susceptible to asthma and you are going out for a jog, you may have an outbreak than if you're in the Adirondacks and you have the same health conditions. But trying to get an actual number on the cost of getting the data and the metadata and the time that a person tracks that, puts it on their local system, we really didn't get there. And that's why I have this struggling. So, person. So the conclusion is, yes, you can do predictive analysis and it's good, right? Combined weather or environmental conditions combined with asthma data, you can get a better prediction on the way asthma evolves. big deal. We're still working on the metadata connection, and that's where we are. And, you know, maybe you guys have some ideas for me. But I said I would give you the update on where I am, and reality of research teams in 1 year, that's that. The NIHS, we've had much more success with in terms of collaborating and working together. And so, picture of the team again. So Tom stuck with us on both because he says he really wants to understand what metadata is. He's told us this is Becky Boyles. She's a data scientist at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and very much appreciates standards and thesauri and things like that. Even though she comes at it, she's background's in like pharmacology. She knows she needs to be talking with people in informatics and comes to visit, you know, as you would say, she'd come visit any kind of talk that was of that interest, she would come. So she would be here right now if she was living in Milwaukee. She gets it. This is Herbie, a doctoral student in economics who we had on the project, just to point out some diversity. Other folks were from the Renaissance Institute and our group. So, goals here, advance nascent work on metadata capital, the concept, work with the NCDS community. That's why we picked RTI and the NIHS because they're part of this consortium. And we never really actually accomplished this third one to reach out to the research data. This is an ongoing effort that I've been involved in some metadata-wise. So the viral vector lab, that's where we started doing this work. And what they do there is they produce viruses and then in this little lab, and then the scientists are trying different ways to identify genes and things to kind of combat and fight the viruses. And it's way over my head. But I am going to show you just sort of, let me see, the reality of getting going in a research team like this. We went out to the NIHS a few times, and this is other parts of our team. This is Chip Ross, Chuck, showing us how they record keep out there. I mean, this is one of our major national labs. Your taxes are paying for them. And he's cracking up because they have like little handwritten labels, okay? These paper notebooks, logging in. And so what happens is they're actually producing the same viruses over and over again. And because they don't have good record keeping, there's this cost that is for replicating the treatments and replicating the data. And if things were automated, they would have a much better use of staff time and more efficient. And so they know they need to have record keeping improved, and they know that they need metadata. So I had some other pictures of us out there that he's laughing. That's a better, I don't know if you can see the back, but right? They don't even have a handwritten labels. I mean, they don't even have machine written labels. That's, Regan Moore was also on our team. I'm curious, have any of you ever heard of the iRods system? It's a database, it's like repository, but it's using grid computing. It comes out of the data intensive cyber infrastructure environment from San Diego supercomputing, and then those folks are joining the Renaissance Computing Institute. So out there trying to get the NIHS to use the iRods system and knowing that they need it. Metadata, there we all are. Not the best image here, but we really spent a lot of time talking to these folks that are on the front line doing their work, just so we could get a number to work with. But they were a great team and took us through, and I think one of my roles here is to share about the whole research process, and you got to take the time and go meet with the people, and I think that's why we had more success in this one that compared to the fit environment. Okay, so back to where I am with this, where we as a team. So I'd say it's closer to home. This work I didn't mention, right? Malcup here, and even in the literature, Trust and Cecilia, very good work. There's a special issue of the International Journal of Metadata, Semantics, and Ontologies that's devoted to scientific data, and it's, the editors, I'm not gonna try to pronounce their names, I think, they're both Greek, but the intro to this special issue, they start to talk about cost. And so if this whole idea of capital and metadata or capital and KOrg appeals to you, these are recommended. Okay, so I did a kind of little sidetrack there, but I think important for grounding. All right, so back to the NIEHS. What were our goals? To understand the workflow at the viral vector core facility, or core lab, to map the life cycle, to explore how we could develop machine actionable rules to put into the IRODS system, and to create an IRODS prototype for the NIEHS. And in doing that and getting the information in, could we track the amount of time it would cost and look at the salaries of the people who would be doing that to get a base number? And we did our methods to do this. We did what we call collaborative workflow modeling, and we captured the day-to-day activities of people like Chip, who I showed you, doing his work. We looked at all of their paper logs that they're doing, their notebooks, and they did have Excel spreadsheets, out the wazoo. I looked at them and did, trying to get their metadata lined up from each phase, and how would we create what they call an IRODS, a microservice out of it. And so here's some of our results, right? The scientist designs experiment. They submit their information on the DNA sample they want on a web form, and then some of this I have to confess I'm not a scientist. A lot of my lead here. Transfect cells takes place. Then they do these steps where they collect it. They whatever process it goes to flow cytometry, and then they deliver it for analysis back to the scientists. And that's what's going on here. And Angela Morello, a doctoral student working with me, was really her and Adrian Ogletree responsible for coming up with this and doing the mapping and so forth. And we had many tables. This is just like one of many tables we had, where we looked at each one of these steps, okay, from each part, and looked at how the metadata was labeled from the original activity that, Chip was pulling out those boxes to the vial, to the pad, to the Excel spreadsheet, to whatever, and looking at each one of these labels and how we would get that. And so we kept having these, thinking, okay, which ones could be automated and which ones came in as original at each phase. So a lot of work where that was going. Then we worked on what we called microservices, and this is an IRODS kind of feature. So how these steps take place in the IRODS activity. Some of it probably looks common, archiving, provenance tracking, attention, distribution. And here, actually, we did get so far as creating a prototype in IRODS for the NIEHS. Meanwhile, we figured out staff time and so forth, and we came up with a number that both Chip and Becky Boyles were comfortable with, and so all we got to is $50 per hour for an experiment. Actually, we do have a little bit more. They do about 30 experiments a week that they're preparing for. So that doesn't give you the number for the metadata, okay? That gives you the number for the whole experiment. So it's some fraction of that, we could say, allocates toward metadata. And so that's where we are on that team, that project. And that's as far as we have gone. So, it's hard reporting on this and not being able to say, I have this grand conclusion about how much it costs and what metadata capital really is. But I am sharing where we are, and let me end up with some, I have to share some limitations and conclusions, and then maybe we can go back to thoughts and discussion. So we had this idea that we could put everything nicely and neatly into this formula. I believe that over time with the NIEHS, if they keep at it, and they actually are now implementing a full IROD system. I mean, they're very excited, and we were considered very instrumental in getting going. I believe that over time, if we keep a good relationship with them, we can get the scientists to help us figure out a little bit more of the cost or percentage of their time that might go into the metadata activity. But it's a little hard because I'm not actually in North Carolina anymore. But you know, I hear from Becky pretty much every 2 weeks anyhow. We're moving along. We got the call out. She's going through the whole government process to even get the call for proposals so they could get the funding for the implementation of IRODs. So maybe the capital segmentation is not the way to exactly go, but we're still thinking about it. Another limitation, well, there's not we could probably come up with this in our discussion, a one-to-one relationship between cost and value, that just for you folks, right, how many times have you bought something, paid for it, and you might not, you feel like you paid too much or too little. So how can we put that idea into something like the viral vector lab, where some teams are studying, and if they figure out, you know, how to cure something could affect so many people, and others could affect a small percentage of the population. I mean, how you can put some kind of value around that. I mean, it's not just money, right? It's life, it's things like that. So this whole one-to-one relationship, it was a way to start the conversation, but I don't know if it's really a way to continue on. I already gave this one, you know, the metadata, and it's not as always good as your data situation. So that's a limitation. And then there's another equation that we've looked at. Just in our, we have lots of meetings where we get together as a team, and it's called a successive growth rate, and it goes up and then it goes down. How certain topics or kinds of data are maybe really hot and in season, and people want to study it, and so it could be really up there, and then it could go down. Like right now, the whole situation with the measles, right? And they keep, you know, on the news showing those little maps of where the outbreaks are. Well, you know, maybe the value's up. It's kind of like a market activity. And then later on it would go down. So we didn't get anywhere near that, but I'm sure there are other kinds of equations for us to look at. Okay, so some concluding remarks. I have to be positive about this. I think that there's interest and traction. Richard has allowed me to come and talk about it a few times. I keep getting called into, so Drexel's interesting. It's the informatics and the computing have merged, and we're in a sort of, you know, metropolis there in Philadelphia. So we do get these corporate visitors, and we also have this center, which is an industry academic partnership collaboration, and you know, they have these industry people coming by, and the university thinks they're going to get a nice chunk of money, and so they always call in faculty for, you get like, you know, 2 minutes, one slide, and they always want me to come in and say what metadata capital is. So I don't get really far to tell them the limitations, but they, you know, the industry people, you know, people come in suits, they kind of like it. So I think, you know, a concluding remark, there's traction, at least on some level. They haven't told me to stop coming. I have like another one I have to do in March. My 2 minutes. I already did the limitations. What else? Concluding remarks. All right, we have gotten nowhere where we wanted to in this project, and yet I think we have moved. I would say, I shouldn't say it. I shouldn't like beat myself up. I think we have raised the dialogue. You know, we have gotten people thinking about it. We're not the only, our team is not the only person. I gave you some of other citations. Historically, there's been folks studying cost and cataloging. It's really hard to get your head around. So, yes, I think we should care about cost, and I think that the concept metadata capital has some kind of appeal, and so it can help contextualize the discussion if we can get our heads around better ways of talking about it. We didn't get to anything yet saying, oh, this generic formula could be used across the way. I think we did get at least somewhere a little bit with the NIEHS project, and we need more proof. Early on when I gave these talks, I had like, you know, the friends and the this and the that, because I knew we were embarking on something that was quite risky. And so I still like hope I'm amongst friends here. Okay, so we have a good 40 minutes here or something. What time do I end? I mean, I could talk forever, but I would love to have a discussion. I see somebody already thinking about this. So can I just hold off for a second and just show you? So I wanted to go back to what did folks write down in the beginning? You know, did you think this was capital value? These kinds of things. And then I did have 3 targeted questions, but I don't want to hone us in there. So I have that in case nobody says anything. But you're all ready to say something, and I really hope that some of you have some other thoughts. You can ask me questions about anything, whether it's about capital or sort of the whole reality of working with teams and so forth. So I'd really like to open it up for discussion. So,
well, I want to first say that, well, I'm Tim Patrick. I'm chair of health informatics and administration upstairs on the 6th floor.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been about 2 years ago, we had Mark Tuttle visit us at Mizzou, and he said, well, he would love the opportunity to talk to health managers, health administrators about terminology. This is metadata that we're talking about today, but it's in the same ballpark, and I think this kind of work is really important. It is just a brute fact that people don't like to document. Scientists don't like to document this kind of stuff, but document wet bench work because that's part of their training, but not this kind of thing. And it's important to be able to demonstrate the return on investment to the director of the lab, the administrator, or whatever. So it's really nice. Now, a question that occurred to me in your analysis, when you're talking about the reuse of data and then the metadata going along with it, so the reuse of the metadata. But of course, that could be separated. The metadata schema could be reused on new data.
absolutely.
To collect new data.
I love it.
So,
yeah.
as well though, this is really, it's a good way to start is to assume there are no changes to the metadata schema as it goes into other uses, but it could be augmented, and that's going to complicate the return on investment calculation or the cost calculation.
Yeah, I like the thought. I mean, well, yeah, you know.
And one other thing about the cost, the cost is there, I would tend to talk to particularly administrators about the opportunity cost of not doing this correctly.
Well,
There's a huge opportunity cost.
yeah.
So
I'm, you know, want to hear from other people
Yeah.
on this thought. But, you know, I will interject, but I want somebody else to have something to say, please. So scientists don't want to do this, but you have to more and more prove to your administrators things, and there is now from our federal agencies, national agencies, and even internationally, so much pressure now to put your data out there and to make it open and accessible when there is government funding going on. There's huge efforts, I mean, even in research and materials science, the whole Obama Materials Genome Initiative, where there's sensitive stuff with industry, they still want open data. So
Open
it's,
data, but not with good metadata.
right, but I'd like to think, somebody once said to me, we're in the Stone Age with this,
Mhm.
but maybe there's hope, and,
Well, I was
Thank you.
captured by this thought of, between this kind of value, and the value here is one community, and of course, I'm starting to talk off onto like our KO stuff about epistemology, and how that, the value that it is to the community that you're working with might change, those values will change depending on which communities, because there's value to this data for people outside of, let's say, the Institute of Health or whatever, the government. I mean, like you were talking before about the dryad stuff and the Fitbit and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's different values in different communities for the exact same data.
right.
And did you even get to that point of any kind of discussion on that?
No, yeah, yes and no, I mean, like, yes, because my head hurts kind of thing, that what does it mean to each community is probably different.
A different formula?
Yeah,
maybe, or-
yeah, so we recognize that, but I don't have any data, I wanna say back to Richard, what did we do, we sat around, we rationalized and talked about it, but we don't have any data, so, to do anything, that's the NIEHS is the people we could, I wanna say, play with really well. And now that we got them working with that system, I hope, we can play, it's a little challenging because I'm not there, but I'm gonna say hopefully,
This is
yes.
more a model, this is more of a
Yeah.
model that you're trying to develop in a formula to make it work, but not,
Yeah.
you haven't gotten that formula.
No, but I really, really good, appreciate it, and then tell me. I always get it from you, questions for you. Thanks.
I'm thinking about some of the tacit knowledge that goes into creating a data set. And we've all been at that point where we amassed this data set and then we let it set for a few weeks, and then we don't have any idea what we did to get there with it, or
Mhm.
what it was, or where we got it from, and some of those details are lost. And maybe just going back to training in the sciences, like with the NSF data initiative in question, I know that there are NSF required trainings for anybody who has that type of funding. Maybe they need to start training people how to document their data sets so that it saves time.
I think
Because,
you're really
like,
onto something,
if
yeah.
they had, if everybody were forced to sort of hit a clock
Right.
when they were working with the data set, when they realized they didn't know what was going on, and then they had to figure out how long it took them to recreate in their mind what they were working with.
Yeah.
I think people would have a better understanding of why it's so important to take that extra 5-10 minutes to jot something down.
Right, and put the idea of capital, or whatever it is, in their mind from the very beginning. It goes back to, I forget your name. Tim was saying though, not doing it is a cost. And so I where's your dissertation data?
Oh,
You know.
yeah.
Right, but I mean,
30 years later.
right, the whole,
And I still
I was
use it.
gonna ask you, where your dissertation data is, if you had to go back. Yeah, Richard, you had a comment.
Let's see. Well, yeah, I mean, a week or 10 days ago, and we've had a deadline every Friday for several weeks in crop inspectors.
Yeah.
So I was, I have, 1,000 things or something, and I put them in a spreadsheet, and then I have to sort them. And as soon as I've sorted them, it's not what it was. So if I save it in another column someplace, I have to put a header in another column. And if I don't do that, then I have to do it again next week, and I've lost time, and that's money, right? So
Yeah.
there's some
Right.
kind of formula going on in there. Is there some, maybe I'm naive, isn't there some way to teach my spreadsheet to extract those heads as metadata?
Yeah, I would think so, right, Excel? Yeah, or at least to automatically, you wanna extract it or automatically
Well, as soon as I
propagate.
named the
Yeah.
column or
Right.
somewhere, I've created a
Yeah,
new metadata.
you wanna have a data dictionary,
Yeah.
associated. So,
That's an
I-
application, so.
I would think, I think so. I wanna go back to what Anna's saying. There are these efforts. Jan Quinn, who does some really nice work at Syracuse, had an SF grant a few years ago where she actually brought scientists into, a room like this and gave them some kind of metadata work. And actually, I'm now working, we're starting to work with the materials, why I put the plug in for the materials genome. The material scientists is a big thing at Drexel, and they wanna train their scientists and teach them about metadata, so we're seeing what we can do. But even these large-scale, data net efforts, they all have these training modules. And so teaching scientists about metadata is happening, but I don't think they're going where you're saying they should, and, it could happen. I mean, there's a hook there. So, yeah. You had another comment? Yeah.
Well, I think some of the
Question.
standardization and formats, which is good in the long term, might put some people off of creating metadata.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, scares people.
Well,
You had did I cut you off on your thought? Okay, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say the cost, side of this can be improved by training people or educating people to delay binding their data to, metadata that's too restricted, that's too set to their particular data set. But everybody does that, especially with
Yeah.
spreadsheets. Spreadsheets oftentimes get used and so the spreadsheet is about Missouri data. But, maybe it's not, maybe it's about any state's data, but the metadata is fixed to, it could be about Missouri. And
Well,
so
I
if you
mean,
can delay that.
I do crazy things in my own data, like, I don't write out what the variable name really is, but I know what it is, right? And then I have a lot of data from a huge, we looked at controlled vocabulary used across these, data nets. And you know what? I've given this data to some students to look at now, and I realize that we didn't do such a good job in our own metadata, right? It's like the shoemaker's kids, so, yeah. I see it that I'm like, putting you under pressure in the back of this section here, so, just taking a deep breath. Maybe, other thoughts, questions? Yeah. All right, yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
kind of interested.
I know there's a question back in that quadrant of the room, because I totally put you all under pressure. No, but go ahead, yeah.
I'm curious about the method that what it's like working in a group, because obviously, like, you had about 6 people on that,
Yeah.
and I assume they're not all KO people,
Yeah.
they're from all over the place,
Right.
and so,
Yeah.
how did you even get into this group? How does this even start up if they don't even realize fully what metadata is? Who says we need a metadata expert to get it? Like, just explain that process.
So this is the reality of doing team research, and I have been on some teams where I still think we're all speaking, Greek, but Greek in that we don't understand each other. And then other teams where you somehow end up finding, a hook. And so in this, how did we do it? Well, it happened that Tom, who was doing the self-generated health information, was a visiting faculty member. And he knew metadata was important, but he always says, I don't understand what it is. And I walk by his office all the time. I don't understand what it is. And then I said, well, okay, Tom, I have this idea, let's try this. And he's a very outgoing kind of guy, and he would come to every meeting. And so that's really how I pulled him in to represent the RTI. I just would pass his office every day, and finally I said, okay, let's try something. It didn't really get very far, but it was still, I don't know, I am an optimist. And, maybe like 2 years from now, I'll hear from him and go, you know what, I got it, let's, do it. I mean, that's that team. The other, was Rebecca Boyles, and, was the reason, and I, had been encouraged to submit something for this Red Sea fellow. I was supported by, I got, it's called a data science fellow. And I was encouraged to support something, and so, just to give you the sort of reality, this is probably, cut it off, but, I had worked, previously with the NIEHS on metadata projects, so kind of I knew some people there, and there were former students working in the library, which got Rebecca interested in what was happening in the School of Information and Library Science. So we were talking off and on, and I said, oh, Rebecca, I have an opportunity to, submit this. It's like due in 3 days. Can you write me a letter of support? And that's, she said, yeah, let's try it. So that happened. But we kept talking and finding out what was happening. And we weren't actually even knowing what part of the NIHS we were going to even move forward in. She kept listening to what I had to say, and I kept listening to what she had to say. And it was, we had 1 year, and it wasn't until like 3 or 4 months into the project, she said, the viral vector lab, that's the place we can run this study. They need to automate. They're just one of many research areas in the NIHS. I mean, it's a huge campus with multiple buildings and people doing all kinds of research. That's just one little small lab. And she knew the people there, Chip, who was very outgoing and willing to let us come in and look. So that's how that one happened. So, some of it is just kind of people, relationships, and talking to them and finding that common ground. So, yeah, reality.
Luck.
Yeah, luck, right? I still want to have many conversations with Tom. I should send him here, like, he knows this. I said, Tom, you gotta take a metadata class, or he should come here and study with you.
So where does this get us back to the
Yeah.
question about capital? Is there
Yeah, yes.
some ratio of cost to, is there some cost benefit ratio that's?
So I think return on investment, and I do look at capital as a cost of that, there's some monetary cost for creating a metadata system. Whether it's the cost for the human labor, person's time, and the cost to build the system. But what I struggle with is, well, where do you start to get that number? Is it, do you pay for the person who sits there and thinks about the design of the system or scheme? And what about the fact that, right, we're working with double core? Well, how much did it cost that community to actually even come up with a standard? How many conferences, how many people? We can't reasonably get that number. So I think the best we can do is start at, maybe that's really the research question we should be looking at, is where do you start to quantify costs to better understand cost? And that's, capital. Capital's like the hook word or something. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm going on a tangent. I'm gonna go on a tangent.
I feel like I'm taking up all of
No,
it.
but I
My eyes are suddenly open, and
Yeah.
here is
Yeah.
data, if
Yeah.
the critical question is about data infrastructure, then an even more critical question is what is the cost
Right.
of managing that infrastructure, and how can we manage it without metadata? We can.
Right.
Therefore, how do we manage that cost? That's just.
Come with me and talk to NSF, because I try to explain to them they need to pay for metadata research, but they don't, no, they don't wanna pay for metadata research.
That's a
It's-
huge chunk of the cost.
Yeah, of course, they want to pay for design.
Recoverable.
But, oh, God, I had a thought about when where do you start? I lost my thought. Maybe I'll come back to it.
I was gonna suggest another way to approach it, not so much from the cost of creating it, but the cost of losing it. Lindbergh had this, at Missouri, had this, big information center that was funded by the NIH. And, they had an index for that thing, like the catalog and index, for that, that included the reason why everything, item in that library was included. What project it was associated with, what grant, whatever, they had the rationale. And in fact, in that metadata was the intellectual history of his research group. As time went on, and he left, went to NIH, and that index, and that system passed from person to person. They updated at one point. Somebody said, "What the heck is this field?" and threw it away. The intellectual history is gone. Now that, I don't know how you calculate that cost, but it strikes me as enormous.
Jane,
Hi, it's great to see you.
heavy trainer.
Yeah, I remember, I'm glad to see you, thanks for coming.
This kind of relates to conversations that I had with you last year, but typically in business school kinds of terms, in microeconomics, in any given project, we want to look at marginal revenue,
Yeah.
marginal cost, right? So what's sort of interesting about metadata and metadata standards is if you adopt a metadata standard or scheme that other people have a prior investment in, your marginal cost to use that can be reasonable
Yes.
in terms of the marginal benefits you're going to get within the project. So in that sense, you're sort of standing on the shoulders of those who came before. And I think there's
Yeah,
probably a
cost
way to
benefit.
exploit that
Yes.
in your, well, at least in your metadata sales pitch.
Yeah, right, cost benefit, you know, we start with something that's kind of already proven, but continue to have more revenue or gain, or in an industry setting, or make greater profits perhaps. Is that where you're going?
Well, yeah, and also as a person who naively has attempted in his early days to create a metadata scheme from scratch,
Mhm.
I know how expensive that is, right? And so the part of the angst that people have in sort of addressing the need to have metadata associated with their data is this sort of fear that they have of the cost. But one of the things we probably want to preach is a way of defraying that cost by adopting standard approaches.
You know, I mean, yes, I'm the converted, but,
Yeah.
but putting it in these kinds of terms, if that's something that comes out of this project, and there's a better way to clearly articulate something like that, and I haven't, been successful yet, there's no big grant to at least that way, but maybe that can happen. Yeah, I agree with you. I wrote down what that other thought was, but thank you. When I was back with Richard and his eyes lit up, just this whole notion, so where's the capital link? And, so, right, I'm out of my element with the economics, and we had an economics professor who gave us some feedback, and then the doctoral student served as the link. But I did do a lot of reading, and I continue to, save citations that I want to read, and I haven't been able to get back to it. But I'm curious, do any of you here have advanced degrees in economics or anything like that? I mean, what I learned is that it's not quite the science. I mean, there's a lot of theory on the definition of
That's what they say about information.
Right. It's a science, but I'm just saying, there's this word capital, we probably need to talk about what capital means in terms of, there needs to be a domain analysis out there. Okay, there we go. So, and then, the other, point, and you were making me think of this when you were talking actually, is, have some of you ever read Schellenberg, you know, the archives guy, you know, enduring value and evidential value? And I, you know, think there's probably something there, and there's a whole body of literature on value, and what is value, and I mean, you know, in cataloging, you know, you talk about, or, you know, whatever, public knowledge, undiscovered public knowledge, and, you know, curing, and, you know, that one book that, or that one science paper that because it was indexed really well, somebody found it and made a cure, or because it was not indexed well, nobody found it, and the cure took another, you know, 50 years, or was never found, right? And, you know, I mean, I just, you know, get overwhelmed quite quickly with that, but I think it does, yeah. I gotta sort of cut away all these big things and figure out where's the question to start the next phase. And so I've been kind of looking around since I've gotten to Drexel at the different faculty. There's a business school, and then of course, you know, there's Morton School of Business, which is at Penn. But, you know, can I find the economics professor who will think this is good? Because I do believe to continue on some path, there needs to be an interdisciplinary team to really help move it. So who knows? I'm curious. What did people write down? Did anybody want to shout out what they wrote down for the what was capital to them?
Power, money, wealth,
Power,
commodity.
money. What was the last one?
Commodity.
Commodity. Cool. Yeah. Well, for anybody who didn't ask a question, you know, and has a chance to say something. Yeah. Anybody else? And so everyone
I'm
wrote
also
down that-
thinking exchange somewhere
exchange.
in that, and I know you talked about reuse.
Yeah, yeah. Exchange. Knowledge. So anybody have anything that hasn't been said? Yeah.
I found raw material that may not have the value it will once you use it. So raw material that may make it better, more valuable.
Right. It's nothing until it's been processed or mixed. Yeah.
I think that, you know, that I thought of it as the capital, historically, one of the things that is sort of compared with is labor.
Yeah.
And what's kind of interesting is that when we think of the cost of metadata, we think of the labor in, you know, the metadata. And sort of in the private sector, you know, the benefits that accrue from the work of the laborers come to capital,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And, or, you know, they fight with labor in collective bargaining.
Sure.
But how does that work in our field?
Well, you know, I mean, we with the stuff with NIEHS, Chuck really helped us and looked at the cost, the labor, their salaries. But, so this is like off track and scary, but, so I'm subletting an apartment from a guy who is a literature major at Yale, and, he happened to have Adam Smith's, you know, The Wealth of Nations on the thing, but I've looked at that before. But he also had Das Kapital, you know, I keep, looking, it's all brown and, you know, ready to crack, it's like an old paperback. You know, but, right, so I'm not having an answer for you, but I think you're on the, not that I should have an answer, I mean, I think you're right about the labor and how we have to figure out where that fits in. And
Yeah, but we have this idea that you know, at least in the academic and the scientific world, in the truly open areas of that the benefits of that labor sort of accrue for the public good.
Right.
In a way that they don't always do that in a more truly capitalistic
Right,
industrial setting.
and when they cut budgets, they think they can cut it or it's gonna be automatic or whatever, right? So, well, you know, it does go back to what you were saying about infrastructure. Infrastructure requires labor too. So, I have these are just the other questions. Can we study cost? How do we convey value? What next? I don't, you know, I think we're coming toward the close, but I would, you know, we study costs? I don't know, do people think we can?
Yes.
Yes, should we, I think yes, I would be doing this. Can we, you know, we have to try, we have to, I mean, why, what? At least that's what I think. You know, the thing about metadata that I've observed, and, you know, sometimes I have this, we call it the Metadata Research Center, it's, you know, a few tables with students coming in with their laptop, and we do have some computers that are for the Dryad, they're supported by Dryad, but my little soapbox, I guess, is that, you know, people know you need metadata, and they, you know, what standard should I use, or you know, nobody's standard's good enough for me, it's that toothbrush scenario, you know, everyone knows you need it, no one wants to use anybody else's, so they create a whole new standard. And all that is good, but what is not as front and center as somebody like I would like, and probably you here, because you're interested in coming here, is that the study of it, you know, the science of it, you know, where's the data to show this metadata is better than this, or this approach is better than that approach, or this is the best recipe, you know, I'm very interested in the best combination of automatic and manual approaches. You know, sort of pushing the agenda forward of how can we study it and what are the best ways to study it. And so cost is one, or capital, you know, seems to have more. If it gets me in front of some corporate people, great. If it keeps getting me in front of corporate people and we never see any little bit of funding come to the Metadata Research Center, one day I'm just gonna say, I'm not coming there anymore. But, you know, so, yeah.
What about citation analysis for data? If we were to actually start citing your data?
Well, I mean, I think that is very much happening. That is very much happening where, now there are, so Thomson Reuters, right, and, what's the other one? Scopus, or, Elsevier. There's Science Direct and Thomson Reuters. They actually take from Dryad the metadata that we create, okay? It's associated with the data sets. And they, because it's all CC0, we're all kind of back here, you know, we did it for the public good, right? But they're making money off the metadata that gets created in my research center where
Well, I hope they're giving back.
Charge arm and leg.
No, they charge the University of Texas. Where do they give back? So, well,
To
Elsevier.
their shareholders.
Elsevier journals. So there are Dryad makes money too. It's a nonprofit. I don't see anything because I'm on the grant end. Dryad actually charges a very minimal fee for scientists when they deposit their data because it has to keep operational. And there are different payment plans. It's really quite interesting. There's a whole business plan and there's a board, and I'm not involved in that. I'm involved in the metadata and researching it. But, you know, so certain journals, if you're publishing in a Dryad partner journal, you're okay, you can submit your data. Other scientists can buy like a book of tickets, and put their data in. Some, depending on, you know, where you're coming from in the world, there are different, structures, allotments and stuff. And there's different payment plans. The Dryad is a nonprofit, it makes the money to actually run the operation, and in fact, they're not yet off the grant. It's gonna be very interesting, we have another year and a half on some funding, and after that, the operation has to be fully self-sustainable. But yes, it would be really, you know, who knows, there's a future. I will be talking to somebody, I mean, I think that we're at, as I say, back from the very beginning of this, and those are just two things dealing with data citation. There's stuff that I, you know, there's a huge group, Force 11, does anybody know about that? They, you know, all these people getting together and talking about standards and data citation. I mean, that's a whole interesting metadata cost thing. All these competing, you know, first of all, think back to citation, right? We've got, you know, Chicago, ALA, MLA, you know, different the different standards, right, for, what's called the one?
Citation style.
Yeah, citation styles. Well, the same thing has happened in the data citation. And so, you know, Dryad has the recommended approach, and there's lots of people who are, you know, metadata people are quite passionate about it. There's lots of people getting together on that too. And then, you know, there's all kinds of stuff with the modeling. So it's not just the data associated with the research, it's the instrumentation, it's the, you know, simulation result. It's the article is just one piece, you know, so how you put all these things together in some kind of model. And so you've got competing models out there too. We could go on a whole other topic. I think we're getting close to the edge, and yeah. All right, well, I really appreciate the questions, and thank you, and again, thank you to SOS, and in particular, the KOrg group, and Richard. Thank you for having me have this adventure with you. Thank you.
Thank you.